Hey, church family, good to see you this afternoon. I'm finishing my last bites of lunch here at our home. We are just so glad that you joined us. We're really glad that you've been part of our church and the programming that we've been doing, but we're also really glad that God has been in your life and is working in your life. I know that some of you are wondering, Lord, what is there in the future that we have to look forward to? It seems bleak and dark and hard to understand, but I want to encourage you in this season that God is going to do wonders and that He is going to open doors and that His faithfulness will see you through. This afternoon, we are really lucky to have several of our colleagues and friends from our church joining us. We have Jamie Stodola, who's a marriage and family therapist, and our very own Adrian Presley, who's our pastoral care pastor. That's going to be joining Randy and I this afternoon. So we're really encouraged for that. But if you're joining us right now, we want to hear, as we always do, where are you watching from and what was one of the most challenging things you've been through? In a very short way. You don't have to say many details, just a short sentence if you'd like to share. We'd love to hear from you. So, friends, come on. We'd like to see you, Brandy and Jamie. Adrian, please join me now.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, Adrian.
How are you doing, Philip?
Good to see you, my man.
Good to see you as well. Good to be
I,
here.
I feel as though there's a lot of moments in life, Adrian. I miss hearing your voice singing, man, in person.
Oh, yes. Hopefully, these days will be coming back to normal pretty soon, Philip. Otherwise, we'll have to go out and do like John the Baptist, cry out in the wilderness and just sing wherever on the sidewalks and the byway.
Oh, man. Adrian, now you knew the group that sang just a few weeks ago,
Last week.
Take Six.
Was it last week? Last week.
Last week, that's right, that's right. Hey, tell us a little bit how you know them and how it was to have them
From
on.
actually from elementary, from high school days, Oakwood Academy. A
Mhm.
few of them actually went to Oakwood Academy. And that's where they kind of got started. And then they went on to college and formed the group out of that. So that's pretty much where it started. It goes back to the like 1974, 75, 76, like that. Yeah, goes back a ways. Yeah. Oakwood is known for that kind of stuff. There's always groups, singing and groups and doing things on Friday night times. But theirs was so magnificent too. It took the worldwide stage quickly. Yeah.
Oh, man. Now, what was it exactly? Why do you think they kind of came into prominence significantly?
I think primarily because of their unique sound of
Mm,
acapella. I mean,
mm.
they are truly the best in the world at that. That acapella, just straight voices. The harmony, the intricacies of those chordal structures and the rhythm that just can be made with just pure voices. It's phenomenal, phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
Hey, I know that Pastor Randy and Jamie are going to be joining us here shortly, but I wanted to ask you, how has COVID been for you as a pastor and doing pastoral care? How's that journey been for you?
Um, it has been challenging. It's been challenging because those of us who do that work primarily, myself, Pastor Dan, Pastor Roger, and Pastor Daryl, and I guess on some level, a lot of the pastors are involved in different ways, but that's our primary responsibility. We've been pretty much relegated to phone calls, pretty much,
Mm.
or sometimes FaceTime, or even Zoom. I mean, I've actually done a few anointing services, believe it or not, on Zoom.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely, man. I mean, I would have never thought it could be done, but it's been a true blessing. Where you turn, I'm on Zoom. The family's in the hospital or at the bedside of their loved one. They
Hmm.
have the oil, and actually, it helps them to be more involved because they're able to put the oil on the person as we indicate where. Now put it here, put it on the head, put it on the heart, or the hand, and they have an active role in that, which would not otherwise, But it works out very well though, and they're very appreciative for this. So it's
wow.
challenging in that way, not being able to see our members, especially some of our ones who are in nursing homes or in care facilities where they are already isolated as it is.
Mm.
And for us not to be able to come in person, it's been challenging in that way. But
Oh,
it
okay.
also is caused us to be creative. How
Yes,
we
yes.
do ministry, as you've noticed yourself as well, I'm sure.
Right. Well, Adrian, thank you, brother. Appreciate what you do,
Man.
man. Well, why don't we invite now Jamie and Pastor Randy to join us?
Man, bring him in. Bring him in.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
I'm glad you came on, Presley. I was getting worried about Philip. He had a mouthful of food and he was trying to talk, and I was afraid nobody was going to bail him out.
Have mercy.
Oh, man. I literally took my last bite. I was like, I think I could do it in 30 seconds, but it didn't work. I chewed too much.
We have some great people here back. A lot of people. Becky Murdoch, Happy Hot Sabbath, Richard Sample, Scorcher, and it is a scorcher here in Redlands anyway. It's 113 right now, so it's brutal. And I'm guessing from what Grayson Obley says here that there's a Yucaipa Oak Glen fire. I didn't realize another fire had started. So
I saw smoke this afternoon in my yard. I didn't know what that was. Wow.
That's terrible.
We'll definitely pray for that.
Seth Pinckney from Queens, New York. I wonder what the weather is in Queens. Yeah. Adrian, you used to live back in that part of the country. Did it get
I lived in Queens, man.
Did it get this hot in Queens?
It got hot, but worse than hot is humid.
Ooh.
I mean,
that is bad.
My hair couldn't stand up at all.
Your hair just gave in, huh?
Gave in.
Rajeshwari in Texas. Hey, brother. Good to see you, man.
Jamie, I'm looking for Pound, Wisconsin, and I haven't seen it yet.
I am too.
Sheila, hi in Northridge. Good to see you.
Boy, Sheila Morrow, the El Dorado fire.
Oh, yeah.
Oakland Road and Potato Canyon. Thanks for the prayers. Boy, that's worrisome. We have friends and members who live up in that area.
Yeah, that's very close considering we're naming roads now.
You're exactly right, Jamie.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I also wanted to just say thank you, Jamie, for being with us. Particularly, a lot of people wonder, how do you get maybe this expertise in counseling and care? And so we're so glad that you're joined us, because you are that expert with us. And many people don't know, though, that also Randy shares that with you too, as a marriage and family therapist. And Adrian and I, we're lowly just pastors. That's all we are. So.
You're caring for the soul, which is most important.
That's beautifully said, Jamie.
But no, Adrian actually is CPE trained, brother. So he's been doing a lot of clinical pastoral education throughout his career. And so he's been trained also in pastoral care from a clinical side in hospital settings, dealing with individuals who are dealing with all kinds of loss. And so, Adrian, thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Well, our first question that we have for us comes from your sermon, Pastor Randy, which was so beautiful. This series on the life of Ruth is going to be life-changing, I think. And so thank you so much for starting us off here in the beginning. Maybe if people didn't get to watch it, Randy, could you just share maybe a brief look at what you talked about this morning?
Sure. In the story of Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, you have a story of great tragedy and sorrow. I mean, pause and think about that for a minute. You're a woman in that world, which would have been a really tough world to try to survive in alone. But you're in good shape. You have a husband who loves you. You have 2 sons. And even though there's been a famine, you've had to move, you're okay because you have your family surrounding you now with daughters-in-law. But over a period of time, all three men in the family die. And Naomi, as you can imagine, is so devastated that when she arrives back home, back to Bethlehem, years later, when there's food again, she says, "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. She's become bitter. She says, "God took me away full, but he brought me home empty." But the curious thing to me in reading that first chapter of Ruth's book is what happened on the way back to Bethlehem. Because on the way back to Bethlehem, Ruth vows to Naomi to be with her, and she uses words that are among the greatest statements in all of literature, not even just to speak of Scripture. "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. And God, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates the two of us." And so Naomi has had someone vow to her, to the bottom of her soul, "We're in this together. You are not alone." So it's curious to me that having just had that happen, a few days, a week or so later, when she gets back home, she says, "I'm empty. I'm empty, and basically I'm all alone." And I think it's just a window into the fact that when we experience great tragedy, it's understandably, I get it, but it's possible to miss what blessings we do have in the midst of that sorrow. So that's kind of in a nutshell, Philip.
Wow, thank you for that summary. I do have to point out that Jamie got a nice note from her mom, Auntie Jan. And
Oh, did she?
Hello, family. Thank you for the shout out.
All right, very good.
That's
Probably.
good.
Thank you. My cousin Jericho, his mom, my mom, and my other aunt, Jan. It's a bit cooler in Wisconsin, I think, right now.
I bet it is. It's great to hear from them. I just caught here, Jack Cornwell, Olympia, Washington, has heated up to 69 degrees.
Wow.
We may, Adrian, we may have to ask Jack to back off. I mean, that's almost mean.
Oh, man.
Wow.
David,
Great to have your family, Jamie.
sorry. Say that again, Randy?
It's great to have Jamie's family join us here on the program.
Indeed, I agree.
Well, why don't we jump into then the first question, Randy, just out of the heart of what you just said. You know, it seems as though Naomi is communicating she's utterly alone in her pain, and she couldn't see the gift that God had given her in Ruth. Why is that? And we can kind of deconstruct it, maybe pulling Naomi out necessarily. And why do people, when they are in their midst of just such horrendous suffering, why can they not see maybe the support that's around them in that season and time?
Well, I'll just throw something out and then turn it over to Jamie and Adrian. I think there is something that is understandably self-absorbing about pain. I mean, anytime, if you've hurt physically, it's hard to think about anything else. When you're hurting emotionally, it's the same. And so I think it's totally understandable. And I don't know that that's bad. I just think it might be worth remembering that even in that state, maybe God has placed someone in our lives that might be a blessing in our pain.
Randy, I was actually thinking the same exact thing. And I already, I think, had the same answer as you. And as I was listening to you, I also thought about how in the stages of grief, depression is one of them. And we could also, make mention of some of the other stages, but quite often when somebody is depressed, it's very inward focused. It's all about what I'm going through and how I'm suffering, and me. And so I think that is just another testament to discussing the fact that it is very self-absorbing.
Mm-hmm. I think that in addition to what Jamie and Randy have said, just from a very pragmatic perspective, not so deeply spiritual, she lost her husband. She lost her 2 sons. That in itself is enough reason for her to feel as if everything has been taken from her. Now, what she had left was a daughter-in-law, and with the other one started off on the journey, but she probably hoping she would say go back to she could go back without feeling guilty about going back. So she left and went on back. But it's just the loss of those three important people in her life. I don't know what other kids she had. Did she have daughters? I don't know if she had other family, other sons, but if those were the nucleus of what her family was, so she lost as a mother 2 sons, as a wife, her husband. No daughter-in-law was going to be able to suffice and fill
Yeah.
that void that
Yeah.
quick. Anyway, so just very
Yeah.
pragmatically, I can understand them.
And even practically in that time and place, I mean, now you're a woman alone, which was a very challenging situation to find yourself in, because you can't provide for yourself. Normally they wouldn't necessarily have careers of their own. And so, I mean, she feels as though not only did she lose everything, she lost even the ability to provide for her family for generations to come. It's over. It's almost as if I'm gonna just die myself. Nothing will ever be remembered of me and our family. Um, impending doom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But going back to your thought, Randy, you were saying that there's just this absolute self-absorbed space and time, and I think that's not necessarily something that people should feel bad for. It's absolutely the space they find themselves in. And I think the people around need to be so gracious, so affirming, and just in that space and time, give them deference and benefit of the doubt in every way possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that for someone who has never experienced a profound loss, it's easy to seriously underestimate the amount of time and grief it's going to take to work that through. And so there can be a tendency to think, well, why don't you just get on with life? You've got all these other blessings, etc. Keep a stiff upper lip. Don't think about it so much, etc. There can be a tendency to really underestimate the power of grief. And in Naomi's case, she had compounded grief. It wasn't just one, it wasn't just two, it was all three. It was her whole family, basically. Very, very devastating.
Yeah, yeah. Now, depending on the tragedy, death, or issues, there might be this significant, I guess you were saying compounding. I would use maybe even a word called like complexity that might happen at times like these. And I'm thinking about certain types of death, tragedy, and hardships where one might find themselves, who is a survivor or who's gone through something, feeling issues of guilt, shame, and embarrassment. So what do I mean by that? For instance, if any of you knew what happened almost 15 or 20 years ago, where an individual, a man married, who had been living in an Amish community. He was not Amish himself, neither was his family, nor his parents who lived nearby. But he walked into an Amish schoolhouse and ended up shooting almost a dozen children and the teacher. And what happened was the Amish leaders and even one of the fathers knocked on the wife's door of this man who had killed all these children and then even killed himself at the end. And they came to offer their condolences and to make sure she knows there's no bitterness and animosity, but only forgiveness. I mean, that talk about a complex type of grief, a grief where she's dealing with the guilt and shame and embarrassment of what her husband had done. So let's talk a little bit about this kind of guilt and shame and embarrassment that some people might feel, whether it's a divorce because of infidelity, or a family member who takes their life, or someone who might die of HIV, or just the complexity of grief that emerges in life. How do people deal and overcome such things?
Jamie, Adrian, what do you all think?
I'm processing the question.
Yeah.
Adrian, if something comes to you, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Let me throw one thing out while they're thinking, Phil, is you've identified a situation there that has a number of different elements to it that I think each one complicates the reality of what's being faced.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you have loss, somebody has died. Then secondly, you have the fact that the person or the persons in that case who have died violently. You have the fact that they're age inappropriate deaths. This is not somebody who's very senior, but these are kids. You have the fact that there was nothing that they had done in any way, shape, or fashion to deserve such treatment. And then you have, for the wife of this person who did the shooting, you have, as you pointed out, the shame, the embarrassment, the humiliation of knowing that someone you knew and at least at one time loved has engaged in this heinous activity. So you have so many different layers of things that I think it's going to take some time and probably a fair amount of help, professional help, to kind of peel back those layers and sort through what has happened. Now, on the part of the Amish, they engaged in an act in that case that, I'll be very honest with you, I think must have a special kind of divine grace in order to be able to engage in.
Yeah.
Because in my own natural state, there's no way I could have done that.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
And so I'll be honest, I don't want to sound cynical, but I usually think of one of two things when I hear of something that is a response that is that quick. I think either the person is still in denial, they haven't processed this to the degree that they're going to have to in the coming days, weeks, months, and even years, or they just have a unique grace from God that either that particular situation or God's mercy on them in that particular moment gave to them. So those are just some thoughts.
And I'm curious how, I don't know if you had mentioned how long between the incident and her going to the family. Did you mention, or do we know?
I
think
can't
it was pretty soon.
exactly, but it was within the day or two, I think.
It was very soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think of a situation happened, was it last year? The gentleman that got shot in his apartment in Chicago. It was African American gentleman got shot by a police officer.
Yes.
By mistake. She thought he was in the wrong apartment, I believe.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes. I remember that.
And they went to court. And his brother was offering forgiveness for the lady.
I remember that.
To the point of almost thinking that she shouldn't even serve time for it, almost, And the mother had to say, well, that's kind of his position. That's not really what we all feel. I think that's a little premature to kind of do that, in that way. And I'm not sure whether that falls in the category of naivety or a special grace from God. But I think that those things take time to mourn and to heal through the pain of these things. And you're right, Randy. I think a lot of this on that level, professional help is so important. It's so critical, I think.
Yeah.
There are things that friends can do, churches, pastors, but people like Jamie, yourself, who have professional training in that way, that's an ideal situation for that type of training.
In fact, go ahead, Philip.
I was just going to say, I really like what Ramona Hyman here says. She says, yes, forgiveness does not suggest that one has overcome grief. One can grieve and forgive at the same time. I really like that.
Wow. Yeah. Jamie?
I was also looking at that one as well. I just want to clarify that something Synth from Queens, New York is talking about. She on Facebook had two different mentions about the self-absorption that we were talking about and depression. And within grief, depression is one of the things, and that can cycle pretty quick depending upon the person. Maybe the person would have moments of depression or weeks. Everybody is different in how they're experiencing grief. And so she talks about the body's imbalance. And so there's definitely a fine line between which came first, but definitely there are aspects in which if somebody is depressed, depending upon, many other things, what is causing it, have they seen their medical professional, it's not just, oh, well, it's a chemical imbalance and therefore they can't help themselves. It's through therapy, different types of approaches, perhaps more than one, that would help them. So ultimately what can happen if somebody is depressed with these self-absorbed thoughts is that they begin to create a feedback loop, right? And so then that causes more depression. It helps, causes them to spiral down even more. And so that's where therapy or other types of natural or even medical interventions can be used to help. So you have to do a very holistic approach when somebody is dealing with depression, and really take a look at what's the cause. So I just wanted to clear up that question for those of you that are not on Facebook, since messages are on Facebook.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you, Jamie.
Very good. I noticed, Philip, Dana Stellian here says you learn to live with grief. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. We would like in our instant society to think that we can get through something very quickly, but sometimes we just have to live through it over a period of time. It's not something that happens fast. Back in the years when I was leading grief recovery groups, I remember a woman coming into one of our groups and saying later in the group, when I arrived here, I had the plan to get an A in grief recovery. I was going to come here, take care of it, do it, move on. And she said, I've learned that just doesn't happen. It's just too messy. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Wow.
Now, by the way, in the light of all of this heat, friends, you have to look at what Dave Werner said. He's inviting us all over to his place to come over to enjoy the pool. Need to conserve energy. I would feel he's in Loma Linda. I would feel as though I would be a poor neighbor if I didn't invite y'all to wade in my pool this afternoon while listening to my vintage chapel record collection. We have Schamburgers, watermelon, and lemonade. But feel free to bring KFC or BBQ. Philip, that's right around the corner from you.
I'm going over.
You didn't get to finish lunch.
I'm going over. I messaged him while you were all talking. He said, bring the family. So we're going.
Just don't start eating till we're done, Philip, because we'll make the rest of us hungry.
Oh, man. Hey, but now I wanna just say, Adrian, if you could get a little closer. People can't seem to hear you very well, Adrian.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Or some headphones maybe. But I did want to harangue you three just a little bit longer on this complex type of grief. I want to see if there's a little bit more we might be able to bring out in terms of how people deal with embarrassment and guilt and shame in the midst of already a difficult situation.
Yeah, that's challenging, and sadly, it's real. I've been involved over the years of pastoral ministry in many different funerals, and there have been times when there has been a funeral where someone has died for a reason that might be deemed to be socially embarrassing or socially awkward. Either the diagnosis that they had, or maybe they ended their own life, or something like that. And my heart always weeps a bit more deeply for families who are in those situations, because it does add another layer of complexity, another layer of pain and sorrow, that just the death itself would have been enough. But now you've added this on top of it as well. And I've watched people over the years, Philip, handle it quite differently. In some cases, there's a fairly active effort to not let it be known what the cause was. Sadly, human beings being what human beings are, that usually comes out anyway, even if you're trying to hide it. It seems to me that that probably the best way forward. And understand, I'm saying this as somebody who has not been in that situation. So I say it with all due respect. I don't know how I would respond. But it seems that those deal with it better who just come to grips. Don't necessarily maybe announce it and make a big deal of it, but don't run from it or hide from it either. I always think about the fact that shame fears exposure. That's what drives shame. I'm afraid this is going to be found out. I'm afraid I'm going to be seen. And we've all been at that place for one reason or another. But shame is healed by disclosure. The ability to open up and say, this is who I am. This is the reality of my situation. And interestingly enough, when people disclose appropriately, almost always the response on part of others is grace and love and acceptance. So those are some thoughts.
I think that people who may feel a sense of judgment based on what may have happened to their loved one, they feel judged. I think the church can be a more accepting place. If people feel more accepted and not judged, then they'll be more likely to come forth openly. I remember years ago, there was a family I knew in New York who had a son, I think a son or cousin who had died of HIV. And back in that time, there was a stigma attached to it. When the person died, they didn't want anyone to know at all. No one ever knew about it. They just had a burial for a small group of family, and that was it, because they were afraid that they would be judged by the church, or that the family would be looked down upon by the church. I hope that we come to a better place of accepting people as people and realizing that their pain is legitimate and the sorrow is legitimate no matter what the circumstances may be. I would hope to get to that point. Or people feel that graceful atmosphere,
yes,
they will be more likely to come forth openly in that way.
Yes. As a community, if we could foster a more loving and compassionate disposition, it would go a long ways in allowing for that. Absolutely.
One of the other things that comes to mind for me about people trying to keep the information from getting out as to the distinct cause is that if there's nothing else that is potentially obvious, then those that are mourning, it's very ambiguous as to how, to try to figure out why this person is gone. So it definitely does help the grieving process to know why, and all of the questions that circle with the grieving process to have some answers. So sometimes when, for whatever reason, the information is delayed, that definitely delays the process of grief too.
And I would add one other piece to that, Philip, that I have found as a pastor is very important. If let's say an individual has died because either they have ended their own life, or like Adrian was just talking about, there was a time when HIV was, I think you said it well, Adrian, there was just this stigma, and well, this person did something to deserve this. There was that kind of sentiment in the air. So let's say something along those lines happens, and the family members choose not or choose to try to keep it from being known as to what has occurred. Like I said a moment ago, people will often know, and they'll fill in the blanks, or the talking goes on out in the hallways, and they know. So if that is not named, then the pastor speaking at that occasion is robbed of the ability to truly speak the gospel to a specific situation, because then you're put in the role of having to be very general about things, while everybody is sitting there in the funeral home saying, yes, but she ended her own life. So what does that mean? And yet, and now you as the pastor in that role can't speak to that. You can't say something redemptive to that. And that's really unfortunate, because that's a place where the gospel needs to be heard. And if we can't then do that. Yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah. I think one other element is the fact that sometimes people just don't want their loved one's reputation and who they were prior to passing, or the thing that they did, to be tarnished.
Right.
You know, how you exit the world wasn't necessarily how you were as a human being all those years prior to that moment of an imbalance of the mind, a season of sickness, or just, you know, an unfortunate reality of sin overcoming you, and you did something you regret, you know. And so family members can be protective as well of
Sure, absolutely.
identity.
And somebody shared a thought years ago that has stayed with me, and I've shared with others because it meant so much to me. And that is that, thankfully, by the grace of God, God does not define us by our darkest moments or our worst decisions. God does not define us in that way. And if you say, well, tell me where you get that, I would point you to one personality after another in Scripture, just one after another. In fact, a good place to go is to Hebrews 11 and start reading how all these people lived by faith. They're God's Hall of Fame. These are the people who are in God's Westminster Abbey. These are the greats of the faith. And yet, if you start scratching down beneath the surface in these lives, you realize this isn't such a morally upstanding group of people. And yet God has not defined them. For example, Moses is in that list. God has not defined him by his murder of an Egyptian when he was trying to save the people of Israel by his own power. God didn't define him that way. Noah's on that list, and he certainly did some things after the flood that were not reputable. And then just go on down. Jephthah is on that list, for heaven's sakes, who sacrificed his child on the altar of his own professional advancement. And yet there they are. And so God does not define us by our darkest moments or our worst decisions. And so if we are able to say that at a time of grief, it may help us get beyond that question, well, what about the fact that? And may allow us then to move on in the light of the gospel, knowing that God does not define this individual by either certain choices or actions, or by one choice or act, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah. And that's a grace-based culture that you need to bring into the situation. Unfortunately, we are in many times a shame-based space, driven by the worst thing we've done is always going to be then blown up on the tabloid, on the news, on social media. You know, locally there have been some things that have happened over these last years, and you hear people blast them on social media, and it's just like, man, if the sins of my life were recounted behind me,
absolutely,
you would say, what right does this person have to declare the gospel week in, week out? And I'd tell you, none. I fall in the mercy of Jesus.
Absolutely, Philip. Amen.
And I think, unfortunately, many individuals don't assume that they need his grace as much as this person who did a heinous thing. And that's from the pit of hell, that we can earn our way to being beloved in a society, and particularly beloved in heaven's court by our actions.
Yeah, you are so right, Philip.
Sounds like what you both are saying is that we need to see people the way God sees us. Sinners saved by grace. If we all see ourselves in that way, then no one can feel the need to feel more superior, spiritually or otherwise, to anyone else. But we all need the same grace of God, no matter what our circumstances may be, whether our sins are inward or outward. We all need the grace of God, and God sees us as sinners that need salvation, that he died for. And if we view people like that, then we would be rid of that judgmental attitude.
Yeah.
You know, Adrian, I've heard it said that there are going to be 3 surprises when you get to heaven. The first surprise is, well, I'm here.
You need Brandy's there? You need
The second surprise is walking down the street and saying, "What are you doing here?" And the third surprise is, "Well, where's so-and-so?"
Wow.
It just kind of throws a curveball at the way we so often think of things.
Truly.
Yeah.
What are some great comments here, Philip?
Oh yeah. I think they'll be good. Maybe why don't we read out a few of them before we go on to the next question here.
Marianne Fisher says we need to trust in God and we need to follow Ruth's example by leaving a good example for others. I think that's very true. What other ones?
Dana, I like this, what she just wrote. As a hospice chaplain, I've learned that grief is a special space where God's grace and unconditional love are revealed through the love and kindness of others. Just like Pastor Randy said in his sermon today. Thank you, Pastor Randy. And through the process, finding meaning in the darkest times.
Wow.
Yeah, love and kindness from others, that goes a long ways. You know, I remember when we had a death in the family, and, you know, Elaine and I were crippled, literally, emotionally, and physically in every way. And this couple came over probably within an hour of it all. And they were literally booking the plane tickets for us. They were finding food for us in that moment. I mean, they were just hands and feet of Christ that we couldn't have, literally, emotionally and mentally. We just weren't there.
Yeah. You know, and I think that's one of the real gifts that can be given to somebody who's grieving, especially probably in those early hours and days, is don't wait for them to tell you what to do. Don't wait to be asked. Just show up and be the hands and feet of Jesus. You know, we'll watch the kids. We'll fill the car with gas. We'll clean the kitchen. We'll do whatever. We'll just step in and be of support and help.
Yeah.
I completely concur with that, especially during this COVID time. There are a lot of people who aren't experiencing grief like we would normally in society. So if, as the sermon spoke about, if you know someone that in the last few months or since COVID has started that has lost someone or had a tragedy, reach out to them, you know, text them, let them know you're thinking about them. And if you're able and feel comfortable, what can you do for them, or how can you stop by and provide a sense of normalcy and provide some comfort or whatever it is they might need help with.
I think the other thing is, though, the person hurting at times does need to be willing to say they're hurting.
Exactly. And some people really don't know how to say that. That's some of what I do in my job, maybe as pastors you do as well, reminding people how to respond to those that are checking in with them, and that it doesn't have to sound needy. Sometimes just thanking the person and saying, you know, it was really lovely that you stopped by and that you brought, I don't know, food, whatever, and say to them that those are the kinds of things that have been helpful for me during this time. So you're just giving a positive reinforcement for what they've done, which if you're feeling really uncomfortable to say, I need more of that, it definitely would help to reinforce that, to give that positive reinforcement and be very, very, very direct about it, not, you know, kind of glossing over it, but be direct about giving that positive reinforcement.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got to read David Smith's statement there toward the end of the chat. That's powerful. Philip or Adrian, somebody?
I don't see it. I'm
okay.
I'll
Maybe
read.
Then okay.
David Smith here says on Facebook, my dad was killed in a hit and run. We were crushed. A day after, my friend Phil Draper came over. He sat down across from me, was quiet for a long moment, and then just said, tell me about your dad. What was he like? That was huge, and a tender memory to this very day, 18 years later.
Wow.
Wow.
That's just such a simple gift, you know, to give. One of the greatest gifts we can probably give another person is the gift of attention.
Mm.
The gift of attention being we're looking at them, we're listening to them, we're not on our phone, we're not distracted by the television, we're just listening. And for Phil to sit down across from David and say, "Tell me about your dad," at a moment like that, I would think would be very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've experienced that, in doing hospice chaplaincy. Unlike church ministry, when someone passes, you usually would have had a relationship with the family already. So you walk in the door with some sort of credibility because you know people. But in hospice work, you are literally walking into a house or a nursing home or a facility where you know no one, no connection.
Wow.
And that happens when I go see family. When I would see families who had lost a loved one, and I walk in the door and there are 15 people there that I've never seen before. It was intimidating at first, and I realized that I don't want to call it technique, but that Dan was it who was Smith? Which name?
David Smith. David.
Dave, yeah. But when David said that's what I do every time I go, I'd say, tell me about the person. I wish I could have known them. I'm sure there was a life they had before now. What were they like? And from the time you start that, have time, because everyone wants to speak about that. Everyone, from the old to the young, and it really makes an atmosphere of them being able to appreciate that person's life and to realize that person's life had meaning and still does. Absolutely.
Yeah. And if that kind of thing can be done in the presence of others may join in, or people that are hearing may not have had that experience with them before, or maybe it happened before they were born, for example. And that is extremely intriguing and comforting to those that are mourning, to say, "Oh, I didn't realize that about so-and-so," or, "Wow, I didn't know that was, he liked whatever it was." And so that can be really holistic if there are more people in the room or more people involved in that process.
Yeah.
And on a personal note, that you aren't going to push us to go personal, but you said you would allow it though.
Absolutely. Adrian, can you push the volume button maybe on your computer? Let's see if that might be it.
Is that better?
I noticed some comments that say they're struggling to hear you. I can hear you. It's a little bit softer, but
it would be better if I could use my earpiece, but I'm scared to go out and come back in.
Oh, you know what? Try it. We'll bring you back in.
It would be better. Okay, I'm trusting you, Philip. Hey, if y'all don't see me again, it's been nice, but I hope
Oh man, maybe there we go. We'll turn them off for a moment here.
You ought to read Philip Bob Rova's quote here, because he talks about what it's like. Maybe I'll read it here. In our immigrant community from Northeast India, we gather at the affected household. We sing, give words of encouragement, and reminisce. This will go on for several days and evenings. That's really powerful. That's just people just being there. They're just together. Wow. They're singing, they're talking, they're telling stories. Yeah, what a value a community has at a moment like that.
I didn't realize that. I don't know a whole lot about the Indian community. So that's very similar to the Jewish community who would sit Shiva for 7 days. I'm sure there are others like that, and they have their, unique ways that they do it. And we need that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Adrian, you're back with us, brother. Are you feeling better now? Can we hear you?
Does it sound better? Does it sound better?
Wow.
Suddenly, Adrian, you got a deep voice suddenly.
Oh my goodness. Let me go. I'm going to stop where I started way back in the beginning and catch up.
Nah, just sing a song for us.
I was going to say
That's right.
Oh, no. What I was going to say on a personal note, when you were referring to when people start talking, Jamie, people say, "Oh, I didn't know that about that same person." When my grandmother passed, we called her Big Mama, and she had a big family of kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. And we got around the house talking about things. I was just 100% sure. I was 100% sure that I was her favorite grandson. I knew that. I knew that there was no other one that was close to her But as everyone spoke, they all said the same. I said, "Wait a minute, she told you that? She told you that?" So we realized that she had a way of making everyone feel as though they were the most important people in her life, and I think that's a gift.
That really is a beautiful gift, Adrian. I had the opportunity to participate in a funeral a little while ago that they had a mother like your grandmother, and they commented on that. And each child, as they got up, their first statement was, "I was mommy's favorite." So, and
Wow.
where do you get that but a family, Adrian, like yours, coming together and connecting and sharing during a deeply sad time? That's really beautiful.
Becky Murdoch says something interesting here at 2:47 on Facebook. She writes, "How do we get over fear or shyness in reaching out? Do we sometimes assume a grieving person wants to be left alone?"
Yeah, I think a lot of people would assume to leave them alone, especially since they wouldn't know what to say. But and of course, it depends how you're going to try to reach them, if it's through written word or calling them up or stopping by. So I would say that it's probably common, but the best way is just to say, "How are you?" Or, "Hey, can I bring you something today?" Or I thought about you today, and just go on and share. And maybe at the time when they receive it, it might be hard for some people to receive it, but in the long run, I think it will do better to have said something than to just back off and shy away.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
really like what Jamie said a lot, because it does.
Yes.
Everything she said wasn't trying to explain the loss. It wasn't trying to minimize their feelings or anything like that. It's just, "I'm here. I'm sorry. Here's what I'd like to do for you." Another thing that I might add that I've encouraged people to say at times is maybe just own what you're feeling and say, I have no words, but I'll tell you this. If you can give me some clues of what you need, I'll be happy to do it. If you want to talk, I'll listen. If you'd like to do something else, I'll go with you. If you want to, just say, "Give me some clues. You may not always know, but I'm willing to do what you need."
And if you're asking these questions and they say, "Oh, I don't know," then just say, "Okay, that's okay too, but I'm here."
Yeah, I'll be here. That's right. Exactly.
Hey, now
I think what I hear Jamie and Randy saying in a nutshell is what we call the ministry of presence. The ministry of just your physical presence, or just had a phone call or a text. And I guess, as Randy said it so beautifully, he said it so perfectly, because I've had to use this a lot of times my own self. And and that is just, I don't have the words. I don't know what to say. But just your presence alone, or a word or a thought or a card, that will be immensely appreciated. And it also depends on your relationship with the person.
Yeah,
If you have a very close relationship, you can enter some spaces that someone with not that relationship can't or shouldn't. But anyone can reach out and just say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," and avoid these things of avoid the no-nos of saying, "I know what you're feeling," or begin to enter into that space. Stay away from those kind of things, but just be that presence there for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, now we had a few technical difficulties along the way, so I have still a few more questions here. And I want to tell our viewers, if you'd like to share this program as we are speaking, that goes a long ways in just increasing people's awareness of the wonderful resources and just the material that could be an encouragement. So if you're on Facebook, please click that share button or copy the URL if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Roku, keep watching. I don't know if you can share.
Yeah. Hey, Philip, we've got to read what Ruben Yanez says. Ruben is the head of our maintenance department at the church, and we love Ruben. He says, "Having a huge family like I do really helps with the healing process." And there is something to that. I've had the privilege of knowing many, if not most, of Ruben's family, of breaking bread with them on occasion. And I just watch how they come together as family.
Mm.
They do so on a weekly basis. They eat together, they share together. There's a strength in that I don't know where else you can get that kind of strength.
Mhm.
I think there is definite truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If I may point out quickly, Margaret Lagos talks about an experience she had with a friend and about hugging at 2:53 Facebook. Yeah, and so I just wanted to say, you know, there is an art to hugging, and maybe a little kind of tip on hugging is when you give somebody a hug, take a breath, like model for them. This is what it's like to exhale. And when we exhale, we are regulating our bodies. So take a breath, get in sync with the person, as long as they're willing to remain in the hug. That's just, that kind of hit me, that she was, you know, talking about just wanting, the friend just wanting to be in her arms, and that was helpful. So hugs, physical
Wow.
presence. Some people
Yeah.
are a little shy of hugs these days, but hopefully we'll get back to more normalcy.
Right.
Rajeshwari writes that she lost a 44-year-old son in a motorcycle accident. He was in ICU and
Oh,
way home when someone ran a red light and hit him. But I had a lot of friends who stayed by me to get me through.
Mhm.
That's really a blessing when you have friends and family around you.
Mhm.
That's really an incredible thing. Some viewers maybe don't have a lot of family, or they might not think they have a lot of close friends. And I just want to encourage you, please be vocal about your hurt and pain so that someone can reach out.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, especially during these COVID times, from personal experience, I can say in loss, what has been most helpful is during especially those shocking moments, a few hours or a few days, whatever that is, even weeks sometimes, just having somebody there, like somebody in the house, somebody with you. They might even be doing their own thing at some point, but there's a need for closeness to people. So, you know, the ministry of presence again.
Yeah,
Amen.
absolutely.
Amen. Hey, now why don't we jump to a different question, and that's more so, how do we support those who are grieving, particularly when we cannot relate to their pain?
Mm-hmm. So that kind of leads into the difference between empathy and sympathy. We do have a strong ability to sense and tune more and more in, like, deeper into empathy, and be able to have a similar feeling of what that person is going through. That's what empathy is. So there is a strong amount of alignment that you can do, but then we also know that factually, for example, maybe you haven't lost a child, or you haven't lost a son. Maybe you did lose someone else in your life, so you can, that might also be the thing that could be helping you in tapping into empathy. I would say those are some of my quick thoughts when I think of that question.
Yeah. I think, Phil, even though we may not be able to relate to the specifics of a loss, we can relate to the generalities of the feelings. Because we've all had moments when we have felt sorrow, when we have felt broken, when we have felt lost, when we felt hopeless. We've all had those moments. And if we can remember that experience and relate to them on that level, what we needed at a moment like that, what did I need when I was in that situation, may be helpful. So it's true, we can't always relate to the specifics, but we can relate to the general human condition.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what
I would
Ruth
also
did.
just one other little piece too.
I was saying that's exactly
I
what
think
Ruth did
we're kind
for
of talking.
Naomi.
I see your
For
mouth
Naomi,
moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should finish the thought.
Adrian,
I would
want to say something, Adrian?
It's funny, when I put the earpieces on now, we're out of sync with the mouthing. I see your mouths moving in different ways, different places. But I was going to say that, everyone has experienced some level of grief, whether it's a loved one or a neighbor, or even I would add a pet, because many people have lost pets, and that's a real grief as well. That some of those same feelings and emotions are just as real as though you would have lost a loved one, also.
It's very true. Very true.
Yeah. And what I was going to say also about essentially the ministry of presence is that's what Ruth was doing for Naomi, saying, I'm here, I'm staying.
That's right.
We're in sync. Your God is my God.
Yes.
Exactly right, Jamie. She was saying, all the others are no longer here, but I'm here. Yeah, you're right.
Hey, now tell me the difference, Jamie. You kind of started us off on this, but what's the difference between sympathy and empathy, and why does that really matter when we talk about grief?
Well, sympathy is more like, I can see what you're going through. It makes sense for like that you recognize that there's sorrow there. But empathy is that you're actually feeling that thing. So there definitely can be a fine line. Almost maybe you could say there could be a spectrum to it.
Yeah.
But empathy, we have mirror neurons, and mirror neurons are just that. And so when we see someone in pain, that's why especially going and being present with them, seeing people in person is so helpful and necessary. So we have, brain functions and biological functions that also help us to align with someone. And so, as well as then our memories and thinking back to times where I felt X, Y, Z feeling or had this similar experience. So I am feeling right along with you with empathy. And sympathy is like, oh, I'm really sorry for that situation that you're going through.
Yeah.
That's a really good explanation. Yeah.
I think of Brene Brown, who has, check her out on YouTube if you can. She has a cartoon that's kind of playing in the background to one of her lectures. She's Jamie probably knows more specifically, like a psychologist, PhD psychologist.
She's I think originally maybe a licensed social worker, but she's gone much further in her education.
She has this video where it portrays the difference between the two, and it's someone has just been dealt a horrible hand. They find themselves in a pit in life through tragedy, a difficulty, some circumstance, and someone walking by pops their head into the hole where the person is and says, "Oh, how are you? Do you need any food, like a sandwich?" And the person's like, okay. And then someone else comes by and they find themselves seeing the person in the hole, and they climb down into the hole with them, put their arm around them, and tell them, "I'm here with you."
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah, that aligns very much with Margaret Lago's sympathy versus empathy. I really like her words. Sympathy is superficial versus empathy requires active involvement. And your example definitely exemplifies that.
Excellent. Now, Philip, I can't let us end here without reading the comment at 2:40 p.m. by Jericho Ruiz. Jericho writes and says, "Auntie Jan says she likes your hair that way." So I read that and I thought, well, I don't have anyone named Auntie Jan. I looked at Adrian and I thought, well, she can't be talking about Adrian. I looked at Phil, and Phil's got a hat on. So Jamie, must be you.
Yes, my cousin Jericho and my Auntie Jan.
Okay, very good.
That's
Thank you, Auntie Jan.
Hey, I'm gonna milk one more question out of the three.
Sure.
Now, this one's a little bit more sensitive in the fact that, what do you do if you found yourself paralyzed or just simply struggling to move on after a loss? How do you transition from this kind of the space of utter darkness to potentially seeing glimmers of hope again?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
I think that sounds more like what we call a complicated grief process, in which case, I mean, in other words, as one writer said, there's no such thing as overcoming grief.
Mm.
You just get through certain parts of the part of it may always be with you. But if a person is to the point where they are totally unable to function in life, where they can't leave the room, they can't turn the lights on, they just stay in the bed under the cover, they don't want to eat, they don't want to do anything, then that's more of what we call a complicated grief. And that definitely would be something for a professional therapist, marriage and family therapist, a grief therapist, to really get involved in that process. And that's the best thing you could do as a friend for someone or for yourself. If you find yourself in that complicated space, to get professional help to help you to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Phil?
I think of the reality that some people don't just experience that moment of loss, but then the expanding experience of loss as time goes on. Losing a child, and you realize you see all their classmates graduating or getting married, or you have, for instance, a spouse that passes away and they're missing the grandkids and the children getting older. You lose a friend, or you have a marriage that falls apart, and the struggle of just everything that's expanding. So loss is not momentary, but it's just, oh man, it's like all the loss for the generations to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder about, how do people not get over the fact, I like what you said, Adrian, you don't get over grief, but how do you get to a place where you can just still sense there's hope in life, and this was a horrible tragedy that occurred, a terrible mistake I made. How do I get to a point where I'm okay again, at least?
I'll speak to that a little bit. From a personal perspective, for me, I lost my dad in a sudden car accident when I was 19 years old. And of course, it's been a process, and of course, he's still missed. For me, what I guess provided I can move on, I can go forward, I can live a full life, after that tragedy, for me was understanding the battle of good and evil. And that we're on a sinful world, we're in a sinful place. Satan is ruler right now, and it is his desire to discourage and confuse people. Yet at the same time, God can allow things to happen in order to, he'll use it for good, essentially. And so what has been most helpful for me is understanding that this is a sinful world, and these horrible things are going to happen until Jesus returns. And my forging ahead, my personal forging ahead has to do with helping people to understand that there's good and evil. There's a spiritual realm here that will always try to discourage us, but then there is hope of heaven, and there's hope of seeing our loved ones again. And our loved ones that had a hope and a desire and loving character, of course, of which we do not judge, will be there. And they'll, like Randy was saying earlier, you might say, oh, I might be surprised that I'm there, and then surprised somebody else isn't there, but that somebody else is, because we don't know someone's heart. But for me, that has been the thing that is kind of the kind of closing narrative of my strength journey. And that is that I don't know the beginning from the end, but I know that God has all things in his hands. And there is this dichotomy that is going on, and that is underneath all of these types of tragedies and griefs.
Yeah.
That's a powerful statement, Jamie. Thank you so much. Yeah. I would just maybe add Michael Brownfield's comment at 303. He says, I noticed in Ruth 1, Naomi seemed to believe that God was the one who brought her losses into her life. This is a common belief even today, that you ask people grief. What would you say about that? And I think Jamie, your statement there
Mhm.
is a powerful answer to that kind of sentiment and that kind of question.
Mhm. And you know, Michael, I was actually thinking of that when I was reading scripture. You know, Randy and Phil had asked me to join this, and so I, looked at the bulletin. What is the sermon about? And I read it, and I thought to myself, the way that the wording is, perhaps in original language, it might have been intended differently, but the wording sounds like it is God did this to me. And that's one of the hard parts about the Old Testament, is that it's not that God did it specifically to you, it's that he has allowed it to happen. And the enemy would have done perhaps so much more than taking two sons and the husband, right? He would want to, decimate everyone. So yeah, that is definitely where I'm coming from with my thoughts. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think one more piece to add to that, Phil, is...
Mhm.
Go ahead, Adrian. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I would think that, too, that raises the question of one's own spiritual belief system when death occurs. I guess in chaplaincy and hospice work, you see that more frequently because you're dealing with many different faiths. Some are Jewish, some are Hindu, some are atheists, some are Christian, some are Baptist. So you really have to kind of follow where they are in that process of what their religious belief system is as it relates to death, because that's going to interpret as to how they find meaning in that. It raised the question of how do we respond to someone when they say I hate God because of what he did to me. Do I tell them, well, it really wasn't God who did that to you. You have to really understand the Bible, but I don't believe in the Bible. So you so you kind of have to really follow where they are to understand what their belief system is and support them in whatever it is that they find meaning in that way.
And if you have an ongoing relationship with somebody who's made those kinds of comments, then you can ask more questions to try to understand where they're coming from with that, and build relationship in order to minister and hopefully provide them with more hope.
You're right.
Philip, I know we're over time. Could I add one last thing, and I won't say any more, is that I think one other item that contributes to Naomi's perception of God is remembering that the Old Testament has a very poorly developed theology of Satan. It's almost non-existent. In fact, if you read the account in the Garden of Eden with the serpent is never identified. An explanation is never given. It's just the serpent. To find out who the serpent is, you have to go all the way to the book of Revelation, where it finally names that the serpent is the devil. So there was a very poorly defined understanding of Satan. That comes much more in the New Testament and with Jesus and so forth. And so if you lived in a world where your primary thinking about the supernatural was God and only God, then anything that happened was God. Good or bad, that was just God. That's what God did to me, or that's what God didn't do to me, or that's what God did to them. And that's why we're so thankful for the first advent of Jesus as the supreme revelation of God, is that he adds so much more to our understanding of this great conflict that is going on between good and evil, between Christ and Satan. And now it becomes much more possible to say, wait a minute, my God doesn't do that kind of stuff. That comes from someone else. Like the parable Jesus told, where the weeds are sowed along with the wheat. And then when the owner is told that, he says this simple statement. He says, an enemy has done this. Well, that's the answer of the New Testament. It's not God. It's an enemy that has done this.
Amen.
Wow.
Amen.
Hey, tell me, guys, what do you think would be some resources and potentially maybe a reflection question for people to ponder? I think of one book that is very simple, short, but just packs so much into it. It's called Good Grief by Granger Westberg. And he talks about the reality that grief is not just the loss of life, because we grieve over the loss of anything that's important to us, from little griefs like unmet expectations to larger ones like death and moving, divorce. And so how one traverses the little griefs is a sign of kind of how you traverse the larger ones that you're going to handle later on in life. So it's a great book, kind of outlines the 10 stages of grief. So that would be one I would recommend.
I like the one called just Grief Recovery by Larry Yeagley. It's been around for a fair number of years now, but not long. It's that people who are in grief don't usually have long attention spans, so that's a good thing. But Grief Recovery by Larry Yeagley.
And then also considering
there's a book that there's a book. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm seeing your. We're not in sync. We're not in sync. Yeah, but there's a book. It's called "Why Christians Find It Difficult to Grieve." Why Christians find it difficult to grieve. That's a good book for Christians, especially because we tend to diminish the need of expressing grief during this bereavement process. But it shows us why we feel that way and how to overcome it, and that it's normal and that it's Christian to grieve.
And maybe a little more active thing to do involving others is actually a grief recovery group that you could probably find. That these days you could probably find one online as well.
Yeah. Like with Loma Linda University Church and Jamie Stadola.
Yes.
Yes. One more thing I have to say, one last thing. I have to say this as like an advertisement piece, but I think that churches would do well to have what we call bereavement training programs to train the members themselves how to respond to grief. We've been planning one for Loma Linda Church for about the last 7 and 8 months for a couple that's going to come and do a weekend, but the COVID thing came in and we knew for sure about October we'd be ready. So we now have to delay it again. But as soon as the building opens up, we can go to church again. We will have a seminar that will train the members how to actually respond to grief in the laity, and also allow each family who has grief to be assigned a person to follow them at least 12 to 16 months after the death systematically. And this would be a professional training program. We're just waiting on the building to open to do it. And I think that would go a long ways in helping churches to address grief systematically among its membership.
Oh, good. That's very good. Thank you so much. And Carl, I hear you, brother. The Bible should be the first place you start. I'm with you. I'm with you. Well, thank you so very much, Jamie and Adrian and Randy, as always. It's a blessing, brother.
Loved having you all. Thank you, Jamie and Adrian.
Of course. Yes, it was good to be here.
Thank you.
Blessings, friends. We'll see you here next week. Same time, same place.
Bye-bye.